I walked into the coffee shop that day, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. It was my favorite spot, cozy, warm, and full of the smell of fresh coffee beans. As I stood in line, staring at the menu, something, or rather, someone caught my eye. There, sitting by the window, was a face I hadn't seen in over a decade. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. Could it? It was Rachel, my childhood best friend. We had been inseparable once. We shared secrets, dreams, and countless summer days together. But life happened, we drifted apart, and the last time I saw her was the day we had a falling out. Years ago. The argument had been messy, filled with words neither of us could take back. I never thought I'd see her again, especially not here, in this random coffee shop. I hesitated. Should I approach her? The part of me that missed our friendship won over, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was walking toward her table. Rachel, I said, my voice shaky. Her head snapped up, and for a moment, her eyes widened. But then, just as quickly, her expression softened into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Well, if it isn't Hannah, she said, leaning back in her chair. It's been a while. Her voice was the same, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was an edge to her tone that hadn't been there before. I smiled awkwardly and motioned to the seat across from her. Mind if I sit? She shrugged. Be my guest. I took the seat, my heart still racing. This was my best friend, the girl I used to know everything about. Yet sitting across from her now, she felt like a stranger. So, how have you been? I asked, trying to break the ice. Rachel looked out the window for a moment, as if she was considering how much to tell me. Oh, life's been interesting. There was something in her voice, something cryptic. I wanted to dig deeper, but before I could, she changed the subject. And you? Still in town? Still doing that, what was it? Writing thing? I nodded, suddenly feeling small. Yeah, I'm still writing. What about you? She smiled, this time wider. I'm doing great. Actually, better than great. I've got some big things going on. Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I forced a smile. That's great, Rachel. I'm happy for you. We exchanged small talk for a few minutes, but the entire conversation felt forced, like we were both trying too hard to bridge the gap that had grown between us. I started to think maybe it was a mistake coming over. But then she dropped the bombshell. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, Rachel said, her eyes locking onto mine. Oh, I replied, trying to keep my voice light. Why is that? She leaned in, her expression turning serious. Because I've been holding on to something for a long time. Something I think you deserve to know. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Rachel's gaze didn't waver. That day, the day we stopped talking, it wasn't an accident. I wanted us to fall apart. I planned it. My heart stopped. What? She leaned back, folding her arms over her chest. I needed you out of the way, Hannah. You were always in my shadow. Always there, reminding me of everything I couldn't be. So, I made sure you wouldn't be a part of my life anymore. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're kidding, right? That fight was a setup, she interrupted. I manipulated the whole thing. I knew exactly how to push your buttons, and I did it. I knew you'd walk away, and I was counting on it. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The betrayal hit me like a wave, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Why? I finally managed to ask. Why would you do that? Rachel smirked, but there was no joy in it. Because I needed space. I needed to grow without you always being there, without you always holding me back. I stared at her, my mind racing. The girl I thought I knew, the girl who had been my best friend, was standing in front of me, admitting to plotting my downfall. I felt sick. You didn't need to do that, I whispered. We could have talked about it. Rachel shook her head.
No, Hannah.
We couldn't have. You never would have understood. And besides, it worked out, didn't it? Look at us now. I'm successful. I'm happy, and you, well, you've got your writing. Her words stung, but there was more. I could feel it. She wasn't done. And that's not all, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. There's something else I've been meaning to tell you. I didn't want to hear it. I wanted to get up, walk out, and never look back. But I was frozen, trapped by the weight of her confession. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel leaned in closer, her eyes gleaming. You remember Chris, right?
My heart sank.
Chris was my first real boyfriend. We dated for nearly 2 years after high school, and I'd always thought he was the one. That is, until he broke up with me out of the blue. I never understood why. What about him? I asked, dread filling my chest. Rachel's smile widened. Well, let's just say, he didn't break up with you on his own. I might have influenced him a little. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? Oh, come on, Rachel said, rolling her eyes. You didn't really think he just lost interest, did you? I made sure he knew how much better off he'd be without you. The room spun. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. Rachel, my best friend, had destroyed not only our friendship, but also my first real relationship. You ruined everything, I whispered, the tears stinging my eyes. Rachel didn't even flinch. I did what I had to do. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're sick, Rachel. I don't even know who you are anymore. But as I turned to leave, she grabbed my wrist, her grip tight and cold. Wait, she said, her voice suddenly serious. There's one more thing. I yanked my arm away, but something in her tone stopped me from walking out. What now? I asked, my voice shaking. Rachel stood up slowly, her eyes darkening. You've always seen yourself as the victim, haven't you, Hannah? Poor little Hannah, the one who was betrayed and abandoned.
I klærte her.
What are you talking about? She took a step closer, her face inches from mine. There's something you never knew. Something I've kept from you all these years. I crossed my arms, trying to appear stronger than I felt. What is it? Rachel's eyes flicked to the door of the coffee shop, then back to me. You weren't as innocent as you think. I frowned. What do you mean? She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. That secret you told me, the one about your mom's affair? Yeah, I wasn't the only one who heard it. My blood ran cold. I had confided in Rachel about my mom's affair when we were teenagers, thinking it was safe with her. I hadn't told a soul since, and, as far as I knew, no one else knew. What did you do? I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. Rachel shrugged. I didn't do anything, but someone else might have overheard. And well, you know how small towns are. I could feel the walls closing in around me. My mother's affair had been the thing that tore my family apart. It was the reason my parents divorced, the reason my dad left. And now, to find out that Rachel might have had a hand in that destruction. You're lying, I whispered, but even I didn't believe the words. Rachel smiled, but it was cold, cruel. Believe what you want, Hannah. But deep down, you know the truth. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, my head spinning, my heart breaking all over again. Rachel had destroyed everything, our friendship, my relationship with Chris, and maybe even my family. As I stepped out onto the street, the cold air hit me like a slap in the face. I had walked into that coffee shop thinking I was about to reconnect with an old friend, but what I found was a nightmare. I looked back through the window, and there she was, sitting at the table, watching me with that same smug smile. The Rachel I had known was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had been playing me all along. I turned away and started walking, the weight of the past pressing down on me like never before. I didn't know how I was going to move forward, but one thing was certain. I would never trust Rachel again.